Hi there, and welcome to the Main Idea Podcast. I am Jen David Lang, and I am here to help school leaders learn by sharing some of the best and latest ideas in education. I read lots of education and leadership books, and I save you time by sharing only the most compelling and impactful books with you, and that's what we'll do today. Today, we're talking about a book that describes what it is that highly effective teams do to actually improve teaching and learning. Many schools have teacher teams which function more like groups. And this book shares the secrets of what teacher teams do that are highly effective. The book is conversational and a delight to read, but it also shares step-by-step instructions, and it includes tools that you can literally copy and send to your teams to use. I am a huge fan of teacher teams as the most effective way to improve teaching and learning in your school. Yes, I believe the school leader should be an instructional leader, but I think it's almost impossible for a single school leader alone to coach and supervise every individual teacher into better practice. I think the most powerful lever a school has to make strides forward in teaching and learning is the structure of teacher teams, but it has to be done well. And that's a huge but, and that's where the book comes in that we're talking about today. Today, we are talking about a book called The Handbook for Highly Effective Teams by Bill Ferriter, Bob Sonju, Anissa Baker-Busby, and Kim Monkres. And I chose this book because I think it provides just the set of tools to transform those groups of teachers into highly effective teams. So let's meet two of the authors who are here today. Bob and Kim, would you share a brief background of who you are?
Absolutely. My name is Bob Sonju, and I'm a career educator. This is all I've known, 38 years in education and 20 plus as an educational leader at the district, high school, middle level, intermediate level. And it was what kind of compelled us to write this book was we see this work happening in schools, and we wanted to give a blueprint for what this can look like that will transform groups into highly effective teams.
Amazing. 38 years. Welcome to the show.
Yes.
Kim?
I'm Kim Monkres, and I am entering my 26th year of education. I'm an English teacher at heart and currently a high school principal. I've been every type of administrator that there is possible, from an athletic director to assistant principal at both mid-level and high school. And my passion is really collaborative work. I absolutely love working with other people to solve problems in education and really learn from each other. I feel like as a teacher and being a part of the education profession is learning for not only students, but adults. It's just a constant journey, and I love being a part of that journey.
I love that you were an athletic coach. I did not know that. And obviously, there's so much to learn from teams. You know, we have the World Cup going on right now. My team, the Knicks, just won. And there's so many leadership lessons from that. So I bet it truly informs your work that you do in terms of collaboration and leadership.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, Kim and Bob, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. Let's jump right in. So why teams, right? Of all the ways to improve teaching and learning, right? There's coaching, also get back to teams, PD, conferences, self-reflection, teacher evaluation, right? Why did you pick teams for the focus of your work and this book?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and really is the focus of the book, because we believe that highly effective teams are the tool. That's the process to ensure more students learn at high levels, because we can acknowledge, as talented as individual teachers may be, we don't possess all the skills and the abilities to meet the varied needs of every single kid we see every day. And so we know, as we lean into the strengths of other educators on the team and in the school, we move closer to that purpose of ensuring that our students learn at high levels. And this seems like common sense, but more often than not, it was our observation that oftentimes schools are settling for teachers just working in groups. We meet together once a week, and we talk about kids, and we talk about our weekend and different things like that. And so we just really felt compelled to write about the difference between groups and highly effective teams, and how highly effective teams believe, behave in their everyday practices.
I think that's
I
a
would
good
also
contrast from probably the time when you started teaching, right? Where you're talking about the strengths of individual teachers. And I would say probably from the leadership perspective, you would hope to hire great individual teachers, right? And now there's more of the push toward teams. Sorry, go ahead, Kim. You were going to add to that too.
great.
Yeah.
I would just add that it also brings some clarity to the work to have other people involved in maybe seeing things that I don't personally see on my own. I may not I don't mind not being the smartest person in the room, but I certainly want to be surrounded by the smartest people in the room. I know the answer is out there somewhere, and anybody who can help me solve any kind of problem, I want you on my team. So I just love the idea of each chapter getting deeper into the work and beyond what a lot of teachers find themselves in is the hamster wheel of scope and sequence, scope and sequence, scope and sequence. And it just gets a little bit deeper into that collaborative work and really clarifying what is it that we really want students to be able to learn and do at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's not like, certain people are experts and others aren't. It's that everybody brings a different aspect of expertise. And so when you put people together, you see that power of the team. And I like your word clarity, because the more and more I read, the more I hear that people are not as self-aware as we think we are. Tasha Urich out of Harvard has done research on this and says that actually only 15% of people are truly self-aware. And so we don't see our blind spots. We don't know what we don't know. So to be a part of a team as we plan that scope and sequence, that unit with other people, I think that helps with the blind spots and it adds to the clarity. So thank you, both of you. At this point, I imagine everyone listening has heard of the term PLC or professional learning community. But could you share an overview of this term, maybe a tiny bit of the background about Rick Dufour and his colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. This term PLC has been around for many, many years, and it's best practice in our field. But unfortunately, I think there's some misinterpretations of what the work looks like. People will see it as a professional paperwork community or a professional, this is the way we've always done it community. And they don't see it as a community of professional educators learning together. I've likened it or heard it likened to a recipe that if I give you a recipe for like the very best cookies in the world, and you pick and choose a couple of the ingredients that you want to use, maybe some flour and a few eggs, and then you mix it together, it's not going to produce what you want it to produce. And I think this is kind of what's happening with this professional learning community process. Is there's some misunderstandings. Now, to clarify, this work is driven by four critical questions, and I think they're brilliant in nature. Number one, we've got to get crystal clear on what is it that all students need to know and be able to do. Question two, how are we going to know if they got it or didn't get it? We can't wait till the end of the year to figure that out. We've got to assess that in real time. And then question three, we're going to teach the very best way we know how, and we recognize and acknowledge that we're still going to have some kids that didn't get it. And if it's absolutely essential, we've got to provide extra time and support. So question three speaks to that. How are we going to provide extra time and support for those students that didn't get it? And question four, what are we going to do with those kids who pick it up quickly or already know it? We've got to deepen their learning as well. And so it's really driven by those four questions. And that this book is really begins to address those four questions, how highly effective teams answer those four questions.
And I do think that is the key to the difference between the group and the team, because even back in my day, we met in teacher teams, but we planned field trips, and that was fine for the time, but it's not answering those four critical questions that you were talking about that makes them a professional learning community or a highly effective team. So we still see teacher teams that are not so effective, right? Maybe there are some teacher teams that are still planning the 8th grade field trip or stuff like that, or going around and just having a kid talk, but not really doing anything. What is the biggest problem, because you're both practitioners, that you see in schools or the biggest obstacle in transforming your teams into these highly effective teams? What is the obstacle that you're seeing, or obstacles?
Well, I think the assumption that because you're working with professionals, teachers are the top tier professionals of professionals, the ultimate professionals to me. But that doesn't mean that everybody comes encoded with how to work with others or how to work with a team. And or to clarify the work or clarify to students what success looks like.
Mhm.
And so that's where I feel like the power in this book really is helping teams identify just the clarity in their work. I mean, every state has their standards, and all of the standards can be extremely complicated. And if we as the practitioners don't understand the standards, how do we expect kids to understand the standards? And so it's just really getting with learning how to work with each other, work with our teams,
Mhm.
and really be the essence of collaboration, which is interconnected and a shared goal. And what does that look like? And if we just assume that we're all on the same page, we're really not going to get anywhere. So
No.
what the book does is really gives you step by step, and as you mentioned earlier, tools and applications and processes to actually do this work together, and ideas. And if our idea sparks you a different idea, wonderful. Whatever works for you, it's really up to you and your team. But we just want you to get thinking about how to work together and create that collective teacher efficacy that's at the top of Hattie's list, of what indicates student success. So I just love that that there's this resource out there, and that there are passionate people beyond even us who really just want the best for teachers. And it's not enough to just say, and I was one of those teachers, as you mentioned, that kind of started my teaching career with, oh, you're a part of the 11th grade English PLC, and you're going to meet every Monday. And that was the extent of it. We had no idea what that meant or what we were supposed to do, except I will say that I was one of the teachers guilty of being stuck in that hamster wheel of scope and sequence. Are we doing similar things around the same time? I was fortunate enough to be hired by Bob over about 20-ish years ago. And that was really when a deep dive started happening as far as PLC in the area we lived in. And it was life-changing. It was transforming. It really opened up that clarity for me as a teacher. What are these 4 questions? Am I able to answer this with my students? And really got me focused on what matters when it comes to teaching and learning. And that's where I feel like our resource is so helpful to teachers and especially leaders of schools to say, do you understand this framework? And you be a resource for your teachers.
I think you get at the essence of probably why most schools that have teams of teachers versus highly effective teachers. It's that we put adults together in a room and we assume they're professionals, and they may be professionals, but that doesn't mean they know either the interpersonal, how to work together, how to run a meeting together, and then how to run a team that gets student results. And so I think that is the essence of the issue. And in the same way, when teachers put their students into groups in the classroom and it implodes and they're like, what? You didn't really tell them what to do, how to do it. You didn't train them. You didn't introduce a little bit at a time. So we're just saying the same thing for our teachers as well and our teacher teams. So before we get into the details of the book, again, I was really impressed with all of the useful tools, template structures in the book. So I want everyone to know that I asked to do 2 podcasts on this book. So this first podcast is going to be just on the first 2 parts of the book. The book has 4 parts, and the 4 parts cover 15 actions that highly effective teams take to increase student learning. We're not going to go through all 15. 15 is a lot to remember. So thank you for organizing those into 4 areas. So we're going to just talk about the first 2 parts in this first podcast, and then we'll talk about the others later. So very briefly, but just like there are 4 questions, this book has 4 parts, right? So the first part is that highly effective teams, they have a common foundation. They build that foundation to ensure the team's success. And some teams don't even know how to do that part or do it well. So I would certainly start there if you're new to this. The second part is that highly effective teams focus on learning for all students. That is, they define what is the essential learning that all students should learn, should know. The third part is about effectively using assessments and data, which will be next time. And then the fourth part is providing the extra time and support for learning, or responding when students already know the content, the skills. So let's start with part one, which is about building this common foundation for the team's success. Your book includes the why for each part, the what, why do teams do this, what do teams do, and then very specifically, how do they do that with the structures and the templates. Can you just start a little bit with the why? Why do effective teams need to build a strong foundation, and why do they often skip this step?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad I'm glad you mentioned the structure of the book, because I think that was super important, and there was a lot of thought put into that. All four authors are practitioners, and so as we designed this book, we said, okay, what's going to be the most useful for a practitioner? And so we framed each action step around that: the why, what the action step is, and then why, how to do it, some tools and resources, and then every action step has the language of groups that you'll hear when teams are functioning like with groupthink. You'll hear this kind of language, and then the language of highly effective teams. And we wanted to make sure that that team leaders would understand the difference. So every action step has this language of groups versus teams. But part one really focuses on the foundation, and it's something that's often dismissed. We'll say, okay, we know collaboration is important, go forth and collaborate, but we have to get clear on when we collaborate, what are the commitments that we're going to make to each other to maximize our time together. And we base those on behaviors that we as a team have that may get in the way of us effectively collaborating. We have to dialogue around that and address that in the form of norms, or, I prefer the term, what commitments are we going to make to each other to maximize our time? And we know that we're going to have personality differences. So what are we going to do when we have that? How are we going to address those things? We can't just brush it under the rug. And so we give you some strategies and some tools and different things to help with that.
I appreciate that you jumped a little bit into the what, but I just want to linger on the why for a moment, because I do think that teams often skip the first step of building the structures, the norms or commitments, whatever you want to call them, the goals. What are we going to do when there's conflict? Because there's so much work to do, right? And this always happens in schools. There's so much work to do. We're all professionals, right? Let's just jump into it. So I appreciate that you slow down and you say, no, the whole first section, right? Because that isn't one of the four questions from the Dufours, and right? But you do
Right.
slow us down and write a whole section about building that foundation. So I appreciate that. And people are going to roll their eyes, right? Oh, really? Norms? You want us to do norms again? Roles, right? So could you let's get specific for the listeners. For creating norms, you include a very specific activity, peeves and traits, that I heard about years ago from Daniel. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Venables. So can you just talk a little bit about, like, how, if my team is starting at the beginning of the year, how they might use an activity like the peeves and traits to create some of these norms or commitments?
Yeah, the way I like to frame that to teacher teams I'm working with is, we're all professionals, but we're also very busy people, not just in our school lives, but in our personal lives. And I can't think of a teacher that I've ever worked with that didn't take work home. So we're taking this work home because that's how much we believe in this. So if we're not willing or able, I would say able, because we maybe don't have the tools yet to have uncomfortable conversations. There are going to be things that we don't 100% agree on. I'm not saying it has to be big, deep conflict, but we may not agree. So what does that look like when we are together and we come upon that barrier? How do we get through this? And if you haven't established your norms, or how you're going to get through those barriers, then it becomes uncomfortable, and a lot of times you just abandon ship.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about just the tools in here and the resources is that, and there's not just one, there's a couple of them, but uh, I love the idea of sitting down with teachers and saying, what absolutely drives you crazy when it comes to working with others? Or I put it this way, think about the worst possible uh, co-teacher. Like, think about that. I've been in a co-teaching situation, and I had such a wonderful experience in that, actually. And so I think about the opposite of that person who was such a wonderful teacher to for special education within my general education classroom, and the power that she brought to our classroom. And I think about, we didn't sit down and have these conversations. And sometimes those things naturally happen, but sometimes they don't. A lot of times they don't. So how do we prepare for that? So I like to ask teachers, like, a co-teaching situation, what would be your biggest nightmare? And they can come up with the biggest nightmare situation so quickly, like things that coworkers do that drive them crazy so quickly. And then when you ask to think about, okay, so what would your dream teammate look like? What does that dream scenario look like? Who do you want to work with? There's quite a bit more thought that goes into that. It doesn't really roll off quite as quickly because they're quick to know what they don't want.
Yeah.
And sometimes a little bit not as quick to, like, there's a little bit more thought into that. And I just love that activity as an idea of like, okay, so what is it collectively that we agree upon? And like how Bob calls that the collective commitments to each other, that we believe that we need to be held accountable so that our collaboration time is quality collaborative time, not just quantity. Like,
Yeah.
it's quality over quantity.
Yeah.
It's
And that's a very easy first activity to do in a team. I hand out note cards, and on the front, exactly what Kim said. It really, this drives me crazy, or it burns my butt. And then you finish, it burns my butt, right? When people arrive late to meetings. So on the back,
yes.
right? In order to honor, Jen's need to start on time, we will arrive on time, so I think that's a great activity, and it's important to do that and to check in on that as well.
And I think that
Just
foundation of trust is so important. That
Yeah.
that just not just that simple activity in itself, and then that commitment to each other to follow those norms builds this foundation of trust. That you can't just dive into the work without some of this foundation of trust. Just as Bob was mentioning a recipe, you can't make cookies without certain
Right.
ingredients. And so that foundation, again, not part of the 4 questions, but really critical to the success of the 4 questions.
Yes. And then I think, moving into the idea of setting up roles, again, you may roll your eyes, right? You're like, I know we need a note taker, we need a timekeeper, but in the book, you have some interesting roles. And part of what the roles do, I think, is to also help keep the norms alive. Elena Aguilar, who is one of my favorite people who writes about teams, she has the role of process observer, the person who observes the process. And at the end of the meeting, they debrief about what they saw in terms of the process and whether norms or commitments were broken. So you have some very interesting roles other than note taker. You have, the team challenger or the team realist. Could you just speak to one of these roles to give people a tiny idea of why you chose different kinds of roles?
Yeah, I think it's important for teams to reflect, and I love that example that you just shared. But we see oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this in this work as a practitioner. When I first read this work, I was like, norms, schnorms, everybody knows how to collaborate, right? And that was a hot mess. And then I was like, oh, okay, we got to have norms, so let's adopt somebody else's norms, or let's search the internet and find some norms and submit them to the principal.
AI, yeah.
AI norms, yeah, so we can get those crossed off. But really, these commitments that we're making to each other are based on behaviors that are going to get in the way of our collaborating effectively. That's the foundation for moving collaboration from just a meeting we attend to a time when we're learning together. And I think these very specific roles, you mentioned note taker and some of those, sure, we want to have everybody as a contributing member of that, but some of the ideas that we thought about were just at the end, we ought to reflect. Like, we ought to have somebody that's the realist, that's keeping things real within our conversations and so on. And so we just wanted to give the reader some ideas on what this can look like, that will move our traditional collaboration meeting into a true collaborative setting
And the
where we're
focus
learning.
is on the learning, right? So if you have a
Absolutely.
timekeeper, there's no guarantee that the focus is on the learning, but the team challenger realist is much more connected to the content. I just want to
Absolutely.
hit one more area from this section because you have a whole thing about SMART goals. People are going to roll their eyes about that too. We'll skip that for them. But I like that you have a process for dealing with potential future clashes of personalities, not later in the book for when, your team goes from, into the storming phase, but at the very beginning, preventatively. Do you want to share, what it is you suggest teams do before there's these big personality clashes as the weeks and months go on?
Tim, you want to address that?
Yeah. So what I love about kind of how we've laid this out is I love the dialogue boxes that there's a dialogue of what the language of ineffective groups and the language of highly effective teams. And I want to highlight what I just said. Like, the dialogue boxes are titled just that: ineffective groups and highly effective teams. So from group to a team. Because again, I think we can all fall into this trap of, well, we're all professionals and we're all adults. We know how to do this. I can play nice. I can be professional. Well, sometimes when it comes to maybe a professional who's been doing this work for 25 to 30 years, they become pretty territorial about things they've been doing. And somebody who's new and comes in and has these fresh ideas, they're like, we could do this and we could do that. And somebody might be saying, now, wait a minute, I'm going to do what I'm going to do because that's how I've been doing it. And, we all have different styles of learning, all different styles of teaching. And so just to like touch on one of them is not another personality typing activity. We did that last year, but really is about learning about each other. Let's take the time to talk to each other about how we learn and about how we work best and how we can take our strengths and our weaknesses and combine them and really strengthen this group. And we acknowledge the differences in each other and we celebrate them. So the book isn't about making everything cookie cutter. It's actually giving you the freedom to be who you are and be different, but also embracing the differences in each other and how to take those differences and work with each other and being involved. This work is too important and it's too hard to do alone. So it's so wonderful and powerful to know that we have people, even if we're different, who are in our corner and are sharing the load and doing the work with us. So just an opportunity to have conversations with people who are living the same truths that we are.
And I think so. Thank you. And we're probably spending too much time on the first part to really set it up. But I think that, yes, personalities are different, people are different. And so to have people learn about each other as people and what are your work styles, your personality types, there's an activity in the book. It is well worth that time. You write in the book, quote, the technical work of collaborative teams is the easy part. That is, what you're saying is the easy part is deciding what to teach, how to teach it, how to assess it, how to respond when students don't learn. You're saying that's the easy part. The hard part is the collaborative part. And there's another quote, I don't know if it's yours or someone else's in the book, that what makes collaboration difficult is that you must do it with other people. And I laughed out loud. I'll say that again. What makes collaboration difficult is that you must do it with other people. And that truly is why it is worth for your teams spending significant time on the first section. So the first section, as you can hear, is all about building that foundation. And the second section or second part of the book is that highly effective teams focus on learning for all students. They define what are the essentials of what all students should learn and what does success look like? So can you talk a little bit about what that means? What does it mean to define the essentials of learning and to define what success looks like?
Yeah, it's in the DeFore's work and Dr. Bob Baker's work around this professional or learning community process. There's a monumental shift that takes place from a focus on teaching to a focus on learning and
Mhm.
making sure students learn certain things. And we as practitioners, teachers, every teacher on the planet will tell you that of the standards that they have, some are maybe considered nice to know. And then others are like DEF CON 1. You have to know this to be successful in this course or grade level and ready for the next grade level. And along with that, there's a set of skills that may not be represented in the standards that are equally as important. And so the first action that teams really need to engage in is answering that PLC question number one: what is it all students need to know and be able to do? But more specifically, what is it going to look like when they're successful? Because standards we know are written very ambiguously and open for interpretation from teammate to teammate. So just simply identifying a set of high leverage standards, that's only the first step. Then we have to roll our sleeves up and engage in deep conversations around what's it going to look like in student work when they meet that.
So I think, well, first of all, the first part about identifying the essential need to know standards versus the nice to know. The idea of doing that collaboratively so that every student, whether you are in, Mr. Sonju's class or Ms. Monkres' class, is going to get the same exposure is very important. And you're not saying to skip some standards, but spend less time on them. And you have a nice graphic in the book where you sort of have a rectangle that represents from whatever, September to June, how much time you spend on the more essential standards, and then with smaller rectangles representing the ones that you're playing down. Um,
There she,
so to come
yes.
together and decide which are the most essential standards, and then while you're doing that, playing out what does this mean for successful student work? Because as we know, the standards are vague, right? And we have had teacher teams who have broken those standards down into what is the content and what are the skills involved in each standard. But to do this collaboratively helps people to be on the same page. And you even in the I had a little dig into AI, but you do have some suggestions for how AI can help teachers with the work of breaking down the standards. That is definitely new since the Dufour's time, is how you might be able to weave some of that in. So yeah, it's not just agreeing on the standards, but it's agreeing on what these look like and then also mapping out units together. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important to map out the units together and what kinds of decisions teachers are making collaboratively around units?
And I'm going to have Kim answer that if that's
Yeah.
okay. But I want to clarify on the AI piece. We're very careful that AI is a tool, but certainly not the answer. The genius in the room lies with the educators that are sitting around that table. So AI is a resource. Testing blueprints are a resource. Our state standards, those are all resources for us. But in the end, you've got a group of wonderful educators that with all of these resources come up with a set of absolute essentials and then have deep conversations regarding this is what's going to look like in student work when they meet that. So as far as content and pacing goes, Kim, thoughts there?
Yeah. So just taking high leverage standards, for example, and as you mentioned, it doesn't matter. We're trying to get to a place in our teacher teams where it doesn't matter which teacher the student has, that they're getting exposed to the best grade level content and just the best teaching practices. And so in the book, we highlight like why highly effective teams do this. And one of the main reasons is the concepts build upon one another. You had mentioned that you were a math and English teacher. And can you imagine as a math teacher that you were starting in one place while another math teacher was starting on another concept, and the kids were missing out on how these concepts logically build upon on each other. And it's just one of those points that maybe, as we're meeting with our teams, that something I didn't really understand or know, especially as a new teacher, gets pointed out to me by a veteran teacher or somebody who's a little bit more knowledgeable. And we can do this work together because we want to provide the best opportunity for our students to learn, but we also need to kind of flesh out these standards. I love the example in the book about the buffet. Now, we could all like head to a buffet for a variety of reasons. Maybe I'm a dessert person. And so my goal is that I'm just going to get dessert. Like I'm going to hit the dessert. And maybe Bob's a salad person. And I'm totally getting this backwards here because I think Bob's more dessert. But anyway, but if we're teachers and we're saying, what does the most balanced meal look like for a human being? Then we're looking at the totality of it, not just like the likes of each one of us. And that's where I think that importance of scope and sequence and doing that work together comes in, is that our students are being exposed to the standards and the skills for certain standards at approximately the same time and during the and a similar time frame, so that they're getting the equity in their education.
And if
we're
you're
certainly
listening
not-
to this, sorry, go ahead. No, Bob.
I was going to say, and we're certainly not advocating for eliminating standards. That's
Right.
not what but we are saying that we
Eliminate dessert.
we do have to prioritize, right? We're going to give some more time, some a little less time. So
No, I was just going to say, so if you are a leader and some of your teams have not yet prioritized standards, you have a tool in the book to help get them through that. Or if you are a leader and your teachers on your, fourth grade team have never planned units collaboratively, in the book, there's a tool with a series of questions that the team can use to plan them. So, again, as we've been saying, this book doesn't lie in the realm of theoretical ideas, but actual tools. So if you read this chapter as a leader, you can walk away with reproducibles that you can bring to a team meeting. I'm aware of the time, and I want to end this, and then we'll do another podcast in 2 weeks. But so for the leader who has some teams who have not yet built a common foundation, if you could share one first step for those leaders, and then if you have another leader who feels like their teams have a good common foundation, but what's a good first step for focusing on defining the essentials of what all students should know? So if each of you could give one first step for each part of the first 2 parts of the book.
Well, at the end of each chapter, there's a tool for self-assessment and reflection. And I would say that's a great first step, because sometimes you just don't know where to start. And it seems overwhelming, but 100% I would not skip the foundation. And we talked about that a little earlier, but I think that's where teams have such a superpower to build camaraderie, to build trust, and to build that professional and effective and collective teacher efficacy together if they build that foundation. But in those first two sections, I would definitely do that self-assessment at the end and see where you are. Maybe you're further along than you thought. Maybe you're not as far along as you thought, and it's okay. You are where you are. And this, I think you'll be able to figure out where to start from the pages of this book.
That sounds great. Okay, wonderful. Well, we have been talking with Bob Sonju and Kim Monkres, 2 of the authors of the Handbook for Highly Effective Teams. I could talk about highly effective teams all day, but we're going to get to the 3rd and 4th sections in the next podcast. Thank you so much, Bob and Kim, for your time. I will put your contact info in the show notes later. And for everyone listening, thank you for your time. I know how busy you are. If you have colleagues who are interested in improving the effectiveness of their team, I hope that you will share this podcast with others. And we will be back in 2 weeks for the second part. Thank you both so much.
thank you, Jen.
And appreciate it.